Good day, everyone, and welcome. I'm Jack Van Horn from the University of Virginia, and I'm very proud to welcome you to this edition of our 2022-2023 Foundations of Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series. The seminar series is supported by UVA's Integrated Translational Health Institute of Virginia, the UVA Brain Institute, the College of Arts and Sciences, the School of Data Science, and through a grant from the National Institutes of General Medical Sciences. Since 2016, the Foundations of Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series is focused on the use of data science methodologies, artificial intelligence, deep learning, and statistical modeling as they pertain to different themes in the area of biomedical and health sciences. And this year's theme is data science and the public health consequences of the COVID-19 pandemic, where we enjoy presentations on Fridays at noon Eastern from leading thinkers about the issues, promise, opportunities, and hurdles associated with understanding the secondary health effects of the COVID-19 virus. These include delayed health checkups, treatment, mental health issues, drug abuse, increased obesity, and long COVID effects that some people experience as a consequence of having suffered from the virus. Participants selected for our Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab program will leverage these presentations as vital material in our in-person culminating grant project development workshop to be held at the Lodge at St. Edward's Park in Seattle, Washington in June of 2023. Today, I'm delighted to welcome our speaker, Wilbert van Panhuis from the National Institutes of Health in Bethesda, Maryland. Wilbert earned his MD in 2004, followed by a Ph.D. in global disease epidemiology and control from the Johns Hopkins University in 2009. Wilbert is a globally recognized leader in data science for public health with an established track record for improving access and use of data for public health research. He has been highly successful in building large-scale international partnerships for data sharing, data integration, and data-driven research on infectious diseases with scientists from various disciplines and government health agencies at international, national, and local levels. Wilbert is currently serving as the Senior Scientific Officer and Director of the NIAID Office of Data Science and Emerging Technologies at the NIH. And in continuing our 2022-2023 Biomedical Data Science Seminar Series theme, today's lecture is entitled, What Can Data Science Do in the Fight Against Infectious and Immune-Mediated Diseases? In his presentation today, Wilbert's going to discuss how infectious and immune-mediated diseases continue to pose a major threat to human health, as illustrated by the recent COVID-19 pandemic, as well as continued burden of long-term diseases such as HIV/AIDS, tuberculosis, malaria, and many others. Data science has already disrupted many of the segments of society and holds promise to transform the biomedical landscape as well through precision medicine and AI-supported decision-making. And Wilbert is going to take us through all that. He is going to highlight the vision of the U.S. National Institutes of Allergy and Infectious Diseases for data science in the global fight against infection and immune-mediated diseases, and we really look forward to hearing about that. As always, we are streaming this lecture live and for recording via watching on YouTube. Thank you for joining us. Also, our specially selected 2022-2023 Biomedical Data Science Innovation Lab participants and alumni are encouraged to submit any questions they have via the chat feature in their Zoom sessions. I will synthesize these questions and ask them on your behalf during the last 10 minutes or so of the lecture. And with that, welcome, Wilbert. We are super excited to hear from you about your vision and about what's up at the National Institutes of Health. Thank you.
Thanks, Jack. Very nice. Thank you for the introduction. So as mentioned, I will talk about what data science can do in the fight against infectious and immune-mediated diseases. Let's get right into it. This first kind of notion that got me partly into this field, I have a background in epidemiology and in medicine, and moved over to looking more at data science and data access. And here is this notion that you can fight Ebola with information. This is a USAID report. And it's intriguing how you can think about data and information and digital technologies to really have a major role in addressing new emerging disease threats, as well as chronic present infectious diseases around the world. I will today give you an introduction, a vision of where we are at NIAID in terms of data science. Also, more specifically, our strategy and thinking towards a NIAID data ecosystem. talk a bit about data sharing, and then some trans NIAID data science funding opportunity announcement and fellowships that may be of interest to this group. And moving forward, so a little bit about NIAID, this institution. It's one of the 27 institutes and centers of the US National Institutes of Health. The mission is to conduct and support basic and applied research to better understand, treat, and ultimately prevent infectious, immunologic, and allergic diseases. So I think this is a good thing to realize as we're thinking about the role of NIAID in the bigger picture of data science and health, is that this mission area is where most of our application areas are going to be taking place. It also has a mandate, the Institute, to respond to emerging public health threats. Therefore, there has been a major role for NIAID in the response against SARS-CoV-1, also recently SARS-CoV-2, but also Ebola, flu pandemics, and other infectious threats in the past. NIAID has, in fiscal year 2021, awarded about 6,000 research grants and contracts at about $5 billion US. It's one of the largest institutes at NIH, and you can also see the enormous excitement about the potential impact that data science could have from NIAID with this amount of research being driven. There are also very prominent and major intramural research labs, and I'll explain a little bit about that, including the Vaccine Research Center. So these are research labs that conduct research inside NIH, and there are major data science programs and training programs as well in the intramural labs. The strategic priorities of NIAID in terms of the biomedical science are clearly SARS-CoV-2 and COVID-19, thinking about vaccination and universal vaccine against coronavirus, universal influenza vaccine, medical countermeasures for re-emerging and emerging diseases, HIV vaccine prevention and treatment of immune-mediated diseases, and especially focus on immune tolerance. So these are the type of kind of biomedical major strategic priorities. Now, a bit about our office. Our office is relatively new, and the Office of Data Science and Emerging Technologies. So first, I'd like to point you to these divisions we have. So there is the Office of Science Management and Operations, which is driving the management of the institute. There's also the Office of the Chief of Staff of the Director. And then there is the different intramural and extramural divisions. The intramural divisions conduct research inside NIAID. There is a division of intramural research, clinical research in the Vaccine Research Center. And extramural divisions include the Division of Microbiology and Infectious Diseases, Allergy, Immunology, and Transplantation, and the Division of AIDS. And then there is the Division of Extramural Activities, where the operations mostly reside, and also the training grants are being managed. Our office is in the layer that goes across all of the divisions. Here is the Office of Data Science that we are in. There's also the Office of Global Research, the Budget Office, other types of offices inside this trans NIAID layer of the organization. That means that we are not placed in any of the particular divisions, but our work is cross-cutting, and that gives us a really nice opportunity to look across all of the activities that take place at NIAID and then align them to best as possible advance the data science methods and approaches. Going into a bit more of our team here. So I'm the director of the team. We are recruiting at this moment, the deputy. There was also kind of two major kind of areas of activities. One is the data science research and training activities, where we have staff. And then there is data science policy and guidance, where we also have staff. And again, there are some positions that we are still hoping to fill in the near future. And as mentioned, we collaborate extensively with staff across all of the NIAID divisions. Our office is not an intramural lab. We do not conduct actual data science research. We also do not fund major parts of research. We do only some, and I'll show you some of that. Most of our role is to coordinate and to communicate and to bring the divisions into alignment on data science as much as possible in very strategic areas, and I'll show you that. So what the office is really doing. The mission is to accelerate intramural infectious and immune-mediated diseases, accelerate the research by expanding and improving the use of data science methods and technologies. We are looking at both intramural and extramural activities. There is a research program that we are looking at in terms of how data science can accelerate biomedical research in infectious and immune-mediated diseases. There's a training program. We work on community development and policy as well. And with that, I would kind of want to go into the data science for infectious disease a little bit more and for immune-mediated diseases. So why do we need an office of data science? Why do we need to pay attention to this now? Using data for science is not new. It goes way back. As an epidemiologist, I have to give the example of John Snow in London in 1854, when there was a major cholera outbreak, as was not uncommon at the time. And John Snow, very well known, tallied all the deaths due to cholera and displayed them here on the map by address. And each address has a number of deaths. And he found that the largest concentration of these deaths were around this pump, which led him to believe that the water supply through that pump could cause, or maybe one of the causes of the cholera outbreak. And then very famously, the story goes that he took the handle off the pump and that the outbreak actually reduced. So here you can see an excerpt from his actual book and the article written about this pump. So that is using data for science. And I think this is what the data must have looked like. You know, this is Broad Street, and there was addresses here, 15, 16, 17, and there will be number of deaths due to cholera. And so this is the sheet that, you know, may have been used. So you don't need an office of data science to coordinate this work. And, you know, this type of work has happened for a long time. So what's different now is that we're looking at different layers and complexities. So here is an example of from World Pop, a project to estimate population counts, where they use 10 data layers to estimate population, all at 100-meter resolution. These 10 layers include satellite imagery, remote sensing, land use coverage, population counts, and lots of other types of data at a very high resolution. And then the data integration workflow here consists out of numerous steps just to bring that data together, and then their estimation models to really come up with the best possible estimate based on the data of these population counts. Now, this is clearly very relevant for infectious and immune-mediated diseases if you want to know how many people are living in a certain area in the world. And so the complexity of the data here and the data integration and in the methodology used is so far beyond what John Snow was doing that you start to kind of need special expertise. Here is the counterpart where World Pop is sharing their data sets. They have 45,000 data sets right now, and sharing all these data in an effective way so that others can use and benefit from that is not trivial. You need to really think about how to set up the systems and the platforms for that. And that takes a lot of work. So that is also an expertise that doesn't easily come in your typical biomedical training program. And so data science is becoming needed. Here is another example of clinical data. We may all know about the National COVID Cohort Collaborative managed by NCATS, where they combine data. There is, when I last looked, 15 billion rows, about 13 million people in this database, and papers are coming out that look at the combining EHR data, here in this case 2 million patients from 34 sites to look at risk factors for COVID outcomes. And this type of research, again, using these amounts of data that become more and more ubiquitous, and the methods used become so complex that, again, there is a new kind of look and need to have better coordination of these methods. And that's why we need an Office of Data Science. We know that the amount of data generated will continue to grow based on the cost that is reduced for example, sequencing, but also other sensors and other methodologies used to really increase the number of the amount of data available. The challenges are also increasing to effectively manage and use the data. Where do we store this data? How do we use it effectively is becoming a major question that you need specialized experience. Then there are the methodologies, new methodologies. And here I'm using the example of artificial intelligence. The new methods emerge from computational scientific disciplines. These methods do not come from the biomedical sciences. They are coming from other disciplines, such as computer science or mathematics. And we see the opportunity to apply these methodologies in biomedicine. And that translation is not trivial. Think about using deep learning, predictive analytics, translation, classification, information extraction, text-to-speech and speech-to-text, image recognition, machine vision are all highly relevant for biomedical research, including research on infectious and immune-mediated diseases. But you're, again, a typical biomedical training program or a typical biomedical scientist like myself do not know how to use these methods. We don't understand them, or we will not be able to develop them. And so there is this explicit translation component that's really important. So what is data science with all of this? Why do we need data science? So NIH has a nice definition, I think, that points out to three kind of components. One is there are large and complex data involved. Secondly, there is extracting of knowledge involved from that data using computational methods. And the methods become more and more complex, the data become more and more complex. And then there is an interdisciplinary or multidisciplinary community of biomedical scientists and computational scientists, and also many others, but kind of illustrating with these two kind of counterparts, where we would like to foster and bringing these kind of different groups together, which is not something that happens naturally. You need some nudging in many cases. Here are some kind of application areas that you could see in the NIAID space of data science, things like intelligent vaccine design, using AI for vaccine design. AlphaFold was, of course, very important for protein structures and looking at therapeutics, computational immunology, but also model estimations and systems modeling, many more methods you can think of applied here to infectious and immune-mediated diseases in the NIAID mission area. Now, we have some strategic goals that are still kind of preliminary, but that are going to solidify more and more moving forward. One is to improve data access and use. Data are really key to data science, and we really need to improve the access and use. In many cases where we're seeing enormous advantages of computational methods, the lack of data access are really one of the big bottlenecks. So that's number one for us. Then there is developing and improving the use of computational methods. As I said already, the fostering of a multidisciplinary community, and then the governance framework. We need ethical and equitable use of data and computational tools in this space. Now I'll go a little bit more specifically towards the NIAID ecosystem. Again, trying to see what the vision is of where we want to go in terms of the data access. And I have to say, a lot of this talk here, I focus a lot on the data part of data science, less on the computational methods, because twofold. One is that's where we think is the main challenge to address, and also where we can make a lot of improvement, and also where my own background and expertise is mostly in around data access, as Jack already mentioned. Now, looking here at the overall picture of trans-NIAID data science initiatives, we want to go towards a network of fair data and services for infectious and immune-mediated disease research. And there's kind of a pathway. There is data. Data needs to be curated, put in repositories, connect to the ecosystem, and then integrated and analyzed. The making fair part is the first kind of 4 boxes, and then the analytics part is building on that. And here's a depiction of the ecosystem vision that we have, and I'll go into that in more detail. So first of all, that a lot of data on infectious and immune-mediated diseases are not in repositories, are not ready to go and be used by lots of other people in very effective ways. A lot of the data are located in journal supplements, university websites, personal websites, or labs. Like I had a lab in University of Pittsburgh, and we put web data on the website from our lab and let others use it. Or even on personal computers without any discoverability online, which you can call dark data because nobody knows that that data even exists. So that's what the situation is in many instances. Now, data curation itself, preparing data for others to use, is complex but a necessary piece of work, especially for data science. If you want to have an AI algorithm or a machine learning algorithm, the data needs to be in a certain way, a certain format to be able to use that. And many data don't come in this format. There is curation necessary. So there's the data cleaning and harmonization part. There's the quality control, re-representing data in ways that machines can understand it, standardization, and also creating metadata. And so oftentimes that is seen as a very time-consuming task. Up to even 80% of the work of data scientists goes to data preparation. And so we really want to move to a world where data science methods can be used and the data are only cleaned and prepared once for everybody to then benefit from. How do we get there is a more complicated question. FAIR is part of the answer. So FAIR has been around since 2016. It's been used in many different ways, including ways that are not fair. But we want to use FAIR as a roadmap for data curation. So the FAIR principles delineate requirements for findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability of data, not for humans, but for computer algorithms, especially AI. And so FAIR is really meant to improve AI readiness of data. It's not necessarily focused on humans, but in our view, once we prepare data, and we need to move towards preparing data for computer algorithms, humans will also be able to use it in much more effective ways. And so it's almost like a welcome side effect, or maybe a first step. And FAIR is not many things, right? FAIR is not open. FAIR is not, and FAIR does not necessarily mean that the data have to be open. We'll get into that a little bit, but I want to stay true to what the principles really denote. And here you could see them. There are 15 principles. And I think with a lot of hype terms and a lot of highly used kind of jargon type terms, there is a lot of potential for misunderstanding or even using the terms without preserving its actual meaning and value. And I think, for example, if FAIR is used in terms of trying to make data open, or make it as in the same, use it as an alternative to open data, then it kind of loses some of this, because nowhere here it says that it has to be freely accessible to anybody that wants to use it. Or FAIR only for humans, right? The idea here is really for machines. And so you can take away from the value of this by sometimes looking over the details. So I really want to focus on these 15 technical principles that are here, and that we all want to meet as many as possible. And when they are really met, there is really tremendous benefit that we can get from there. So I don't want to reinvent the wheel. I'm just going to build, we are just going to build on these principles to move towards our ecosystem. FAIR has actually gotten into, that has been the advantage of the kind of catchy term, and also the value of the concept, that it has penetrated in large parts of the world, including in the fiscal year 23 US government budget priorities set by the White House, where it says that agencies should prioritize making federally funded R&D open to the public. So that is the kind of connotation that FAIR is not necessarily also open, but this one asks to be open, prioritize that, but also findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable way. That then will lead to more rigorous, reproducible, transparent research as well, but grounded in assessment of ethical, legal, and societal implications. So there is some caveats here, but FAIR is still quite squarely in this budget. So going a little bit into what is so important about metadata. Metadata is really a key to data discovery, use, and impact, and to FAIR. And so a lot of focus will be on metadata. Here you could see a data landscape with all kinds of data assets in it, and only a few have metadata that are in a format that can be indexed in a catalog. And this is the catalog. And the researcher here can use the catalog to find the metadata, search the metadata, and then find the data sets that the metadata are linking to. right? And so what we want is that all that data gets metadata, and that all that metadata will be indexed in this catalog. And that's the first step for people to be able to search and find data sets that are out there based on metadata. That's kind of the overarching idea. Now, metadata have requirements. They need to be structured and they need to be standardized. So here you could see the kind of a denotion of data and metadata. Here is a data file. There is a metadata file in some format that describes what's in this data file. Could be all kinds of things. Can be things like an identifier for the metadata and for the data, creators and who contributed to the data, what's the title, what's the license, what's the scope, how was the data derived, all kinds of information in that metadata that helps humans, but also machines, computers, to understand this data file. And so what we do not want, we want it to be structured and standard. We do not want this description here that says this file has been generated by Wilbert van Panhuis, and anybody who wants to use it can go to my website and make an account and then download the data, etc., etc. I mean, that is not structured and that's not standard. So computers will have a really hard time understanding this, but humans too will have a hard time understanding this. So in the end, we want to go to these structured ways. So the structure is machine readable, standard terminology, and the beauty of metadata is that it can be separated from the data. The metadata can be going to all kinds of catalogs, can be distributed and shared widely, while the data stay in one place. And data access can be governed by specific rules, by specific principles, and privacy can be protected, and proprietary information can be protected. It can all stay there. The metadata is the part that will go around the world to let people know that the data are there. There are some questions sometimes about where the metadata goes if it's not together with the data. Now, there's a very nice kind of examples here. Here is an example of a repository where the metadata are in the same place as the data. So Figshare can upload your data, and what you will see is a human readable text here that describes this data set. And the data set are also right there. You can click that link and download the data set. So the data set and the metadata are together. But they also have a machine readable version of this metadata that you can see here, right? So they have both, and computers can understand that metadata. But now there is also places where metadata are located that do not contain data. It's not uncommon. As I said, the metadata can be separated from the data. And actually, PubMed is one of the best known examples where nobody goes to PubMed to download papers. You know that the papers are somewhere else, right? There's links to the papers, but the papers are not in PubMed. You go to PubMed to find papers based on the metadata, and that metadata points back to the papers. And then if you don't have a subscription to the paper, you cannot access that paper. You have to go and pay for that paper, the journal, and then you can get the paper from the journal. So you have to do your own arrangement with the repository. PubMed doesn't deal with that. It just points to it. And so that's an example of how we can use metadata to give information. Now, after the meta and the curation, the data should be deposited in a professional repository. This is in line with the new NIH guidelines, and I'll go into that in a little bit. And there's a notice here about how to select a repository, but there is really benefits of using a professional repository. There is backup, storage, security, access, transfer, all these kinds of things. So when I was a researcher in the lab at Pittsburgh, University of Pittsburgh, we had a lot of data. We'd put it on our own website, on our own server, etc. Looking back, I'm thinking we should have put the data in a repository, then we don't need to worry about the storage and the backups and all these things. The repository thinks about that. All that we do is point to the data in the repository. The repositories often help with creating structured metadata that's indexed and search enabled. Often has better sustainability than labs and personal websites because some of them have business models that will make them move into the future. And it's easier overall to improve FAIR compliance when the data are in repositories than if the data are in 6,000 different research labs. And so the repository kind of strategy is going to be really useful here. And there are many repositories. I'm listing here a whole bunch for different types of diseases, different pathogens, different types of data that we can all benefit from. And then connecting those repositories to the ecosystem. And so I'm going into the next few slides a little bit more about the ecosystem, what that looks like. There is a search portal, as I mentioned, where researchers can find data, software, and services that are in the ecosystem. Some place you need to be able to search what's in this ecosystem and then use it. And the search portal has some kind of an antenna. This is kind of very conceptual, but this is where we want to go. Then there are different repositories in the community, and they have this kind of beacon that will transmit metadata that can be received by this antenna and can be picked up. So the idea here of the lines, I'm trying to make them as fine as possible. They are not hard bolted connections that are specific to each repository and that need to be maintained in a very rigorous way. They are standards that the repositories are using for transmitting the information, and that's what FAIR is. If they're fair, they can transmit fair metadata, and then the portal can pick that up and index it, and that's how it will be used. But this is not the only portal. Other portals will be able to also pick up those signals. There is no kind of locking in of the exact only one portal can do it. The same with the web services. You can see the web services have transmitters, but also antennas, so they can interact with the repos. They can also be indexed in the repository. And then the software tools who can also be discovered by web services or by portals. So the idea here is really for a very loosely defined network where certain standards are used for the communication of information, but that it's not going to be so specific and hard-bolted that it becomes a very fragile system. Now, of course, the technical implementation of this vision is still incredibly challenging, and I'm not going to show you solutions for that, but this is the vision that we want to move towards. As I said, a distributed network of fair data and services for research on infectious and immune-mediated disease research, where the nodes in the network expose fair compliant metadata, where nodes of data enable data visiting, which means algorithms can come, ask questions to the data, and then return answers without moving the data around. The data could stay where they are. There should be machine actionable access controls so that data are protected and can only be used for what they have permission for. And the model is open and federated, so nodes can appear and disappear based on community needs and activities. If somebody wants to build a web service, that web service can be there and connect to all the data. If the need for this web service disappears, the web service can disappear. The whole system will not collapse because of that. And this is not a new idea. We have taken this straight from the Go Fair Foundation and the Fair movement that has come up out of the paper, where there is the idea now in Europe to set up the Internet of Fair Data and Services here. And in a very analogous way, we can think of that for the NIAID space. And then, of course, there is this new way of thinking about distributed and decentralized learning. I put the paper here about swarm learning for decentralized and confidential clinical machine learning, where this example is used where the data can stay at the hospital systems that do not need to move, but the algorithm goes and visits the data and does its computation and brings only the results that it is permitted to bring to the centralized learning platform. That's where we want to go as well. So there is a portal in development that has been made. This is kind of like the PubMed for NIAID relevant data and software. And we hope to release this in the spring of this year. So stay tuned for that to see what's in the ecosystem. The vision for the ecosystem here, I mentioned already. So there is a search portal and there's the repos and the software tools and web services, but also the people. So the ecosystem is also a network for biomedical and computational scientists to work together for many of these components. And not only scientists, we want the ecosystem to be FAIR compliant, because when it's FAIR compliant, the network becomes ready to use for computational algorithms and AI. And that's why I posted AI as well. AI will play a role and also other computational algorithms in conjunction and complementary to the researchers that are in the network. And then, of course, the access controls that are going to be really important. They're not only technical components, but they're also a governance framework that needs to be developed for ethical use of data and tools, so that we make sure that everything that's been consented to is implemented and used as guidance. Why a distributed versus centralized version? Just to kind of drive this point home, I put this example in that happened recently in the airline industry, where thousands and thousands of flights were canceled and delayed because here from the news, New York Times, it says the FAA said that it traced the problem to a damaged database file. There was no evidence cyber attack, but it was a database file. So that's the idea that if you have a system with one big centralized component that everything connects to, that if that fails, that the whole network is in jeopardy. That's a vulnerability that we hope to prevent. So the NIAID data ecosystem for infectious and immune-mediated disease research is not going to be should not have any centralized component that would cause a vulnerability to the entire network. And so we are moving then from data discovery. So far, it was all about metadata and data discovery to access. As I mentioned, AI and machines should be able to visit the data. We do swarm learning and all these kind of things, which is great vision, but we're not there yet. So in the meantime, we have interim stage where here is the catalog again. Data from research networks goes to repositories here, and in yellow, the metadata comes along. The metadata is cataloged in the catalog, but the data stay in the repositories, and the metadata will point back to those repositories. But how does the data access work? Well, the metadata contains information about the access protocol. And so there are different ways that after a researcher in the catalog has found and discovered the data that they're interested in, there's different ways to get to it. And that's specified. So you may need to click a link. That will be super easy. Or you need to complete the data access request form. Or you may have to email the PI of the center to ask for the data. There may be all kinds of ways that are currently used for people to get access to data, but that need to be followed, because we cannot in one step change all the ways people are using data access. There's too many variability and too many, honestly, people are very attached to certain ways of dealing. So we can preserve that, but at least as a first step, get the discovery part addressed. Later, we will move to data access. So that's kind of the stepwise approach. The goal that we should all keep in mind as we're doing this data infrastructure building is that we want to accelerate new discovery. This is really clear in our minds. We are working in the NIAID mission area. We are working to fight infectious and immune-mediated diseases. That's what the data and the tools are for in our field, in our office. And we want to drive these discoveries, as examples are here, or for using multiple data sets and then move towards these discoveries. So that's the goal of the whole thing. Now, a couple of comments on data sharing, because I think that's really important to think about those principles, and then a little bit about the funding opportunities and fellowships that are related to some of this work. So data science and data sharing are interdependent. This is a very simple slide, but I think it's really important to realize that for offices like ours, where we are working on the science and on the infrastructure and on the computational tools and on the data, the sharing part of data are really closely connected to that. Data science depends on the availability of real-world data. So data sharing is necessary to get the data to the data science and also to other sciences. But also data sharing is made easier by methods and technologies developed in data science. And so, but the data sharing has a lot more of that human kind of component to it that we sometimes think about. And so I'll show you some of that example. So rapid sharing. This is an example where rapid sharing of data has made a dramatic effect on the world, really. Here is sharing by investigators in China of the SARS-CoV-2 genome sequence. So in January 5th, 2020, the announcement was made to WHO. Then 5 days later, Eddie Holmes published the initial genome sequence of the coronavirus on virological.org. The data was there. Very briefly afterwards, a couple of weeks, the data was published here in the journal and was deposited in GenBank. And the entire sequence here on the right side was made available for everybody to use. And so that's that step within a month of the announcement and the data sharing, and even faster than that in virological.org, led to massive consequences, because that accelerated the development of countermeasures. And this is just one example of work that happened at NIAID and in collaboration with researchers, is the structure of the spike protein that could then be discovered, on which the Moderna and the Pfizer vaccine and many other therapeutics and countermeasures were developed. So that's just showing how that data sharing was so important. But data sharing is not easy. Data sharing is a major, major challenge, and it has a lot of very, very complicated layers to it. And I'm not going to show you this video, but I would highly encourage you to watch it. It's somewhat funny, but also somewhat sad, because it really describes what a lot of us are experiencing in terms of data sharing. So I won't give it away, but please take a look. There are barriers to data sharing. And the barriers are not new and well known and have existed for a long time, but we do want to try to make improvements. So this is something we published in 2014 already about barriers to data sharing in public health. And there are really multiple layers to this. One is just technical stuff, like, how to share the data, where's the data located, how do I upload the data, it's too big, those kinds of things. But then there are 5 more layers to this. One is motivational, right? Issues about scientific credit, maybe criticism, maybe there may be errors in the data. There's economical issues around sharing proprietary data or sensitive political situations when you want to share outbreak data in a country. This happened in South Africa. So when the Omicron variant emerged, the South African teams shared the data very rapidly, and the announcement that they had this happen. And what happened is that all the airports were closed around the world to travelers from that country, and that was clearly at their loss. So that kind of disincentivizes data sharing, right? And then there is legal and ethical issues as well. So there are these layers to it, and I think we all should keep in mind that if we work on the technical part, there are other parts to think about. Then go into data sharing a little bit more at the NIH context. NIH has a 20-year history and probably even longer of data sharing policies to improve data sharing, starting in 23 with the data sharing policy for large research, genomic data sharing policy, clinical trials, and now the NIH data management and sharing policy. Many of you may know that last January, this policy came into effect that now is aiming to maximize sharing of scientific data in a broad sense. This has a long history at NIH of trying to lead up to this policy, and the final policy is listed here. And to point out, there are lots of related announcements here that give all kinds of context and implementation details and further guidance on how to use this policy. And our office at NIAID, as I said, we are thinking about data sharing and governance as well. So this policy implementation is also something that we are thinking a lot about. There's a good website at NIH about this, and I'm not going into the policy in detail now, but there is a lot of really good information on this brand new website that NIH created. So kind of coming to the end about this section, about challenges that we all, I think, could think about and need to work on. One is representing metadata that matters in machine interpretable format. That is something that we said, not just the metadata about the author and the creator, but also the methods used, the provenance of the data set, the quality and the uncertainties in the data. So there are lots of things that the metadata can definitely still be improved on. Interoperability is an incredible challenge, both at the systems level as well as the data level, and including semantic interoperability. Just the fact that a data set has the variable age in it. One data set has age, the other data set has age. A simple thing like age can have 2 entirely different meanings in 2 different data sets. So we are not even close to getting the semantics resolved in the interoperability space. That's why FAIR, findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, everybody's recognized that I in the FAIR principles is very, very difficult to achieve. Cost of legacy data, of course, historical observations, future sustainability of the data is a major challenge. Gaps in knowledge and skills. I already mentioned that. Their computational methods become more and more complex. Data curation is becoming more and more complex and specialized. So how do we bring that into the biomedical research community? There are ethical concerns, real ethical concerns about equity, inclusivity, reciprocity, benefit sharing, privacy. How much can de-identification really still happen, especially with a lot of new technologies? Very difficult. Data sharing and use limitations. But also the academic cultural things. There is an undeniable fact that a lot of career advancement in academia is based on publications, which can lead to disincentives for data sharing. And I think it would help to just be honest about that, because that is what a lot of driving factors are. And I don't think anybody needs to be blamed for how this works, but it is the fact of life. And so we are all have to take a role in trying to bring about a culture change where work on data and data access and methods and tools and software is also recognized as valid academic contributions. And then lastly, a little bit of the what are we doing? We've just started. I said the office is relatively new. Just to point you to some things that are starting to come up, and I encourage everybody to really take a close look and keep following what's happening at NIAID. So I've kind of put these phases here of our strategy, all the way from data to analyzing, and then some funding opportunity announcements that have been tied to this. Now, some of these are short-term announcements that have already closed or are close to closing. I'm just showing this as an illustration. And of course, in future years, things will keep coming up. So be aware of the activity and how to follow this along. So we have awards and notices out to for secondary data analysis, using existing data and analyzing them for new purposes. The NIAID ecosystem, and there's a notice out for administrative supplements to prepare data assets to be included and connected to this ecosystem. There is a supplement out for training, R25-based training. There is software announcements out for UO1 applications to develop software for data science in infectious and immune-mediated diseases. We have a partnership with NSF called Smart and Connected Health that brings teams of computational scientists and data science, biomedical scientists together to develop technologies and new methods for infectious and immune-mediated disease, and also many other. This is across trans NIH. There is SBIR, small business contract topics on data science for small businesses to develop tools, methods, software, etc. And there is, this is recently closed, U24 databases and knowledge bases to support the development of those. And so I would say both on the NIAID, it's datascience.niaid.nih.gov. We are developing more and more information about funding opportunities that are related to our strategy, and also really keep a close eye on the NIH Office of Data Science Strategy, ODSS. That is a cross-NIH office that has a lot of activities on data science that are in all of the institutes and centers of NIH. And there is a lot of overlap and connectivity between the different activities in the different centers and institutes. I want to put in one note about K awards and about, because this is for junior faculty. And as Jack mentioned, it would not have been because of a K01 that I received from the Big Data to Knowledge program that Jack is part of and many of us were part of, that allowed me to cross-train from epidemiology and clinical work to informatics research and data science. And because of that, I could build up work and really gain some expertise in biomedical informatics. And so I would highly encourage anybody to look at this, not just at NIAID, but also elsewhere. The NIAID interest in K01s is specifically for data science. NIAID, this is the text from the FOA here, uses KO1 in the fields of epidemiology and data science, which includes not limited to computational modeling, bioinformatics, big data, advanced statistical analysis for infectious and immune-mediated diseases. So check that out. There's also a K25 that attracts investigators, quantitative sciences and engineering research to then focus on the NIAID mission area. More details on the career awards at NIAID are on the website here below. So that's really recommended. Lastly, there are fellowships as well inside NIAID and also across NIH related to data science. It's a real opportunity to bring talented data scientists into NIH, which the more data science talent we have at NIH, the easier and effective we will be at designing, effective programs in data science. So we need the talent as well. At NIAID, we have a fellowship program called the Emerging Leaders in Data Science Fellowship, ELF program. Since 2018, 12 fellows have completed. Currently, 5 are enrolled. We are currently evaluating this program, and we hope to recruit again next year. So stay tuned for that. Those are for graduate student graduates, master's or doctoral level. There is the Data National Service Program, Data and Technology Advancement. So the data scholars at NIH, this is across NIH, coordinated by the Office of Data Science Strategy, for experienced data scientists to spend 1 or 2 years at NIH. It's a tremendous opportunity to basically either completely transition or to just temporarily work at NIH on data science. There is the Civic Digital Fellowship for undergrads. There is the AAAS Science and Technology Policy Fellowship Program for PhDs, MDs, or other science and engineering degrees, also for a couple of years at NIH. And then at NIAID, I put a link to our intramural training program. There is intramural training fellowships for post-bac all the way to the postdoc level that allow, in different types of configurations and models, students or postdocs to come to NIH, to NIAID at the intramural divisions, where also a lot of data science research is taking place. And those are sometimes really nice opportunities to conduct research inside the NIH labs. So lots of things to look at. I would say close with open for any questions or comments. And also do follow us along on the website, datascience.niaid.nih.gov. And there's an email address if you are any questions, you can email the office. And with that, back to Jack.
Wilbert, thank you so much. I was really glad that you brought up the Office of Data Science Strategy, because one of the things I was wondering about is how the individual NIH institutes are all interoperable with each other, at least insofar as coming up with overall strategy. And I was curious if you might say a few more words about what sort of more global NIH vision there might be.
Yeah, that's a really good point. NIH is like a federation of individual institutes and centers. As I mentioned, there are 27 of them. Many of them have their own funding lines. And so it's really a collaborative effort between the different institutes. Many of the institutes are setting up offices of data science, just like ours, to keep those and make those connections. So there are lots of working groups and thoughts, mostly coordinated by Office of Data Science Strategy, but also by others, to align the strategies. And I have to say, it's really, really exciting to see all the interest and the work that's taking place. But on the other hand, of course, there are lots of individual approaches that could lead to some silos and some disconnects. And so the need to move fast in certain places could lead to some solutions and systems and networks and ecosystems that go in a certain direction that may not be compatible with others. But I would say the vision is for this, what I just showed, ecosystem across NIH to connect the data and to make things interoperable. But the implementation is a major challenge. And as some implementations are moving forward, others that come later may not fully connect to that. But there is there is a lot of effort to make those connections, but there is a real tension between institutes and centers like NIAID to move forward in their space, while at the same time staying in sync with 27 other institutes and centers. And so it's just a logistical and operational and cultural challenge. But in the end, the community is converging around things, and NIH is converging around things as well. So, I'm still positive about it.
It's super interesting because I'm a neuroscientist by trade, and one of the things that the NIH has always kind of had, and perhaps it wasn't always front and center, but it's had an interest in data, in computation, computational modeling. And even though it wasn't necessarily kind of like out there, at least in neurosciences, like experimentalists and theoreticians like Fitzhugh and Cole and various people who were fundamental in understanding, say, like neuronal membranes, did a lot of their computational and mathematical work at the NIH on the main campus. And so it has a long history of it. And so it's always, I think, exciting to see the NIH kind of recognizing that it itself has a history, and that, data is the new oil. And that certainly is the case in biomedicine. I hope you agree.
Absolutely. Yeah, it is exciting to see. And I wouldn't, what struck me as being new to NIH was the very large intramural community of the scientists working inside the institute. And and then there's, of course, the extramural part that is supporting the extramural community. And we are privileged in our office that we can look at both places. But it's also nice to see, as you said, that there are lots of advances. The intramural labs, I think, are very competitive places to work, and they are moving into data science. For example, our vaccine research center has already been using, even for the Moderna vaccine, AI and AlphaFold and protein folding methods to do rational, intelligent vaccine design and look at epitope targets for vaccines. And so these methods are being used more and more. Images are the other one, image recognition, and there's a tremendous amount of image data being generated, both clinical imagery, but also electron microscope imagery, where we want to use AI, and some of the labs are starting to use that. So I do think there is actually quite a promising career paths emerging inside NIH for data scientists as well.
It's nice to see you kind of go through some of the barriers that people have in front of them when considering to share their data. And you mentioned things like, just people just generally concerned at a cultural level. I mean, we're all humans after all, and that people are concerned about their own well-being, their promotion and tenure, about having their work scooped by somebody else before they had a chance to kind of go and extract the Nobel Prize that I'm sure they all think is lurking in their data. But also, I've had an experience in data sharing where people were not interested in sharing data because they said, "Oh, I couldn't possibly explain it to you, and I couldn't explain what we did to you." And when we sort of pointed out that that might not really be considered science, they got a little upset about that. But the cultural things are so important. And I'm wondering if there's any way that, the NIH being the, 1,000-pound gorilla in the room has any sort of leverage to help people understand that, no, this is really important and we need to do these cultural things. Maybe the NIH can help with those. Is there anything that those discussions come up?
Absolutely. I mean, this is one of the most common kind of concerns. It's not the malicious concern that I don't want you to use my data, but it's also a kind of a prudent scientist that there's so many complexities. But then, as you mentioned, the reproducibility in science is a key tenet and foundation of the entire scientific process. So being able to reproduce, you need to understand what others did. And that's what, the whole peer review and everything is based on. So, but that's not often kind of how people feel. So what NIH can do, I mean, the policy was published, right? And the policy, current policies is asking for maximum data sharing. And that indicates the policy does not require data sharing. That's one thing I want to make clear. The policy still leaves openings for legitimate reasons, like privacy or intellectual property or other types of things to not share data. But the overall push is to maximize data sharing, and that somebody not being able to explain their methodology to somebody else is not listed among a legitimate reason. So, of course, the implementation and the enforcement of the policy are major questions, but the push is there, and the official institutional policy of this is what we want to see is there, and that will have quite an effect on the community. But then at the same time, it also will require training and education and bringing the next generation, like what you're doing with your program, bringing the next generation online. And as the scientific community kind of starts to transition, the NIH will also be part of that. But there is a tension between taking the lead and being like too much of an enforcer versus kind of following where the community is also going. So I think that's part of the process. But definitely there's a major role, and I think NIH is very interested in engaging with the community on this.
Wilbert, thank you so very much for sharing the vision from the NIH today. Really appreciate you sharing that with us. And it sounds like you're hiring. So, if there's anybody out there who's looking for a job,
absolutely email datascience@NIAID.gov. Absolutely.
It's an exciting time for data science and biomedicine, exciting time at the NIH. And so hopefully people will take advantage of that. And in the meantime, Wilbert, thank you again. Have a wonderful weekend. Everybody who joined us, have a wonderful weekend, and we will see you next week.
Thank you.